When we talk about relationships in database terms, we're talking specifically about how the different tables are related to each other and how the relationships between those tables really define the data that's stored within them. In order to decide on the data model for your database system, it's important to first determine what the possible kinds of connections are that you could have between your tables. And then from those, we'll choose the types of connections that we actually have within the database that we're working on. So in this movie, we're going to quickly review the different types of relationships, and I'll give explanations of each. To keep things simple, we're going to focus on 3 types of relationships that account for all the situations you're going to encounter within your database and your data modeling exercises. They're called the one-to-one relationship, the one-to-many, or also known as the many-to-one relationship, and finally, the many-to-many relationship. The first one is called a one-to-one relationship. It's very rare, and what it means is that you've actually created a table for something that should actually just be a field. So for example, in this case, we've got one customer can have only one address, and one address can only be related to one customer. So the relationship that we have between these two items is just a one-to-one. And in this case, as in any other case where you've identified a one-to-one relationship, that means that address is really an attribute of the customer, and therefore should just be a field defined inside the customer table, not its own table related to the customer table. So one-to-one relationships simply mean an attribute has been improperly identified as an entity. So if you go through the process and find out you've got a one-to-one, you should really just take a look at it, because what you actually might have is just a field. But the main relationship that you'll want to be familiar with are the ones that are called one-to-many relationships. These indicate that you have a parent table that's related to records in a child table. The parent-child vernacular is common to data modeling, and I'm going to be using it quite a bit in this title. So what I'm talking about there is that on the one side of the one-to-many, we call that the parent table, and on the many side of the one-to-many, we call that the child table. So one parent can have many related children. You may also encounter relationships that are called many-to-many relationships, and they should be eliminated. Many-to-many means that you've got 2 related parent tables, but their relationship is not actually direct. Instead, it needs to be related through an additional child table, so in fact, you'll have a one-to-many relationship. We'll discuss this in detail in a later chapter on many-to-many relationships. The way that you'll know that you're done with the data modeling portion of your database planning is because you will have evaluated all of the possible relationships between your tables and then determined that all you've got left are one-to-many relationships. So that's the first notable learning point here, is that you must resolve all of your relationships into one-to-many relationships, thus removing all one-to-ones and all many-to-manys, and leaving yourself with just a series of connected one-to-many relationships. Later in this title, we're going to look at some examples of relationships that we might find in our modeling process so we can identify their specific types. I'm going to use the terminology I've established here a lot in those exercises, so it's important to define them first. Whenever I talk about a child table or a child record, I'm talking about a table or record stored in the table on the many side of a one-to-many relationship. Whenever I talk about a parent table or parent record, I'm talking about a table or a record on the one side of a one-to-many relationship. Once you understand these relationship types and can identify them, then you can move on to diagramming the relationships during your database planning stages.